Hello friends, my name is Christopher, and this video is the story of how I saved at least $1,000 in produce costs by growing things myself in my garden last year. I've been gardening seriously now for 7 years. It all started in 2014 and it just grew and grew and grew from a small spot into a pretty big, sizable area. And in fact, I did a great video summarizing the last 6 years last year. You can check that card out if you really want to see how it's grown. But suffice it to say, I've learned a lot and I'm still learning, and I like to try things new. So last year, the new thing that I tried, one of them, was in my handy dandy gardening journal. I weighed and charted every piece of produce that I grew. Weighed it just using a standard scale. This is a digital one that I got for Christmas. Had an analog one. They work perfectly fine, just the same. And here's the ticket. I went to my local grocery store, which is called the Piggly Wiggly. It's where I shop most frequently. And I charted the prices of the produce that I was growing in my garden over the year, and I took an average. From that average, price per pound most of the time, I weighed it against the poundage that I grew, and then I calculated a value of the amount of produce that I grew in my garden, the dollar value of what that would have been had I bought it fresh in the grocery store. In short, I grew 292.44 pounds of produce, which is 132,000 grams approximately. And the dollar value that I got was $818.97. That's great. That is not insignificant. For reference, I do the grocery shopping. I have since the beginning of 2019 in our household. And I go shopping about every 4 or 5 days. And my bill is about $70. Now that's produce, and it's other perishable pantry items, and it's wine and chocolate and other things that I don't grow in the garden. But it would take, 10, 12 runs to the grocery store to make that $800 value. So it definitely takes a bite out of our budget in a positive way, growing it ourselves. So the purpose of this video is to essentially just go through the things that I grew, take a look at them, and talk about cost savings, and hopefully to inspire you to do the same. Let's begin with raspberries, because raspberries are our favorite fruit. We grow a lot of them. In fact, I had one plant and it has spread, and I have trained it to be essentially a hedge in the garden. I grew 13,850 grams, which translates to 30.47 pounds, at an average of $4.65 per pound. That equates to $141.69 worth of raspberries, just plain raspberries. Now, I use raspberries for all sorts of things. We put them on cereal, we put them on yogurt, I bake with them, and I also make a lot of jam and kombucha. I got into kombucha brewing last year, and a thing about me is I like to control the whole process. So it's neat to me to brew and ferment my own kombucha and flavor it naturally with the things that I have grown in my garden. Raspberry is just a perfect option for that. It also makes great jams that keep nice and long. So that $141 value is just for the straight up berries. I like to think that total for that is elevated if you think of what it goes into, because if you buy a bottle of kombucha from the store, it ain't cheap. Same with a jar of jam, to tell you the truth. So making things yourself and getting the produce yourself really goes a long way in elevating that value. Rhubarb is next. It's the first thing to come out of the ground. I like to call it the harbinger of spring, as it were. These canes are about 7 years old, or the root crowns, pardon me, are about 7 years old, and they're hardy, and I harvest them quite vigorously. I grew 4,700 grams, which is about 10.34 pounds, at an average of $3.50 per pound. That equates to $36.19 worth of rhubarb. Lovely. What do I do with rhubarb? Well, I tend to bring it in and I freeze it, and we use it for baking throughout the year. I have a great cake recipe that I like to use it with. It also goes really well in jams, just like the raspberries do. And my daughter, I've got a 1.5-year-old daughter, she likes to eat it raw. wash it up and chew on it. It's quite good. So do I, even though I prefer it with a little bit of sugar on it. Just a good, hearty, tart snack. Really quite nice. I planted a gooseberry bush 4 years ago, and in its third year, this past year, it became quite prolific. We had our first harvest. I harvested 6,150 grams, which is about 13.53 pounds, at an average of $3.60 per pound. That made $48.71 worth of gooseberries. Now, if you've never had a gooseberry, they kind of look like a green grape, but with some nifty lines on them. You can eat them raw, depending on when you pick them. They'll have a different flavor, either tart and kind of dry, or like mush. But they are loaded with pectin, and when you're making jams, pectin is what you need to actually get it to congeal. So the jams that I make, I don't use any sort of, pectin pack or anything to have them set. I use a gooseberry base, which is just a perfect use for it. I also gave several of them, like a pound or so, to a buddy of mine who's into craft cocktail making, and he made a syrup from gooseberries that turned out quite nicely. So these first 3 plants in particular are perennials. You plant them once and they continue to bear for a long, long time. It's an excellent investment. If you invest in a good plant and you take care of it, all you have to do is some trimming and harvesting, and year again, you get a great bounty. In the very frontmost bed of my garden, I planted our root vegetables. So we're going to lump radishes, beets, and carrots together. I harvested 1,075 grams of radishes, which is 2.37 pounds, at $4.35 per pound. That's $10.29 worth of radishes. Beets, 1,750 grams, which is 3.85 pounds, at $2.30 to be $8.86. And carrots, 6,550 grams, which is 14.41 pounds, $2.47 average, at $35.59 for carrots. Carrots are pretty cheap. They're all relatively cheap when you buy them. The benefit here is that I get a great quantity and great satisfaction of growing them myself. Carrots in particular, well, really all of these are heirloom varieties, so the things that you don't find in the store. Like, I really like my purple dragon carrots. I think they look neat, and they have a particularly earthy flavor, which I like. I like them raw. I tend to make a beet hummus with the beets, and then dip the carrots in the beet hummus. They pair so well with themselves. And something about the, anthocyanins maybe, of the carrots, just that purple flavor, just so satisfying. This is one of the benefits for me of growing in raised beds. We've got clay soil here, so I have to amend the beds with sand and perlite and other things that loosen it up for those root vegetables to grow, and quite satisfied with that. These are first in this list here because they're some of the early ones to get planted. They're more cold hardy, and they, because of that, growing here in zone 5A, we can get multiple plantings. So most of this bed was planted again in another area, some of it in this bed, and we got multiple harvests. Spinach is next. We had a couple different harvests of this in different locations. 450 grams, which is just under 1 pound, at, get this, $8.92 per pound, because you never find a giant pound, pressed pound bag of spinach. So that's, $8.83. That value I can kind of take or leave at face value. I had to calculate that at $8.92 based off of some actual weights. And the thing about spinach is, it's high in iron. It grows pretty quickly. It's great for an early season and a late season because it likes the cool temperatures. It does not survive too well here in the middle of summer. It's pretty to grow and easy to grow, and it grows well in containers, grows well in raised beds, whatever else. It also freezes nicely, so you just cut it off and actually keep the leaves. I tend to seal it airtight in a plastic bag, put that in the freezer, and whenever we're making a slushy or we want to make some eggs or anything else that requires spinach, take it out and use it, and it's ready to go immediately from the freezer. Snap peas are another relatively early thing we can put in the ground. We plant those seeds directly, and they climb our trellises, and they're done, end of June, middle of July. I grew 2,200 grams, which is 4.84 pounds, at $4.37 per pound, coming in at $21.15 worth of peas. I like to grow snap peas, as we're seeing here, so you eat the entire pod, not just the little pea on the inside. They are a sugary, delicious snack with a fresh, crisp crunch. Everything that you think of when you think of fresh produce, a snap pea is. And my baby daughter, again, she loves fresh snap peas. It's, I think, both a nutritious snack and an entertaining activity, as it takes a while to maw through a whole pod. Very, very satisfying. You really get baskets full of it. I grew potatoes successfully, finally, for the first time this year. That was my second year trying. The first year I did it in barrels and it was just a bad decision. I grew 11,525 grams, which is 25.36 pounds, at $1.24 per pound. This red russet potato in particular was about $31.44 worth of grown potatoes. And they're quite satisfying. They have a nice soft red skin. We tend to never really peel the skin off of the potatoes that we grow because it's so tender, and there's a lot of nutrients, of course, that are in the skin itself. When I'm making mashed potatoes, I just, maybe quarter them, throw them in the pot of water, boil them for 15 minutes, and then just mash them with the skins on. It's got a good texture as well, in my opinion. These store quite well in sand. I got them in sand in a bucket in the basement, which is relatively cool. It could be colder with a proper cellar or some sort of mild refrigeration. All these things to work on this next decade, in particular, as I grow as a gardener and storer of food. But they stored for several months before they started to send up shoots, which was really fascinating when I went down to the basement. Anecdotal note here, and all of a sudden my bucket of potatoes looks like this alien farm with stalks coming out of it, and I thought, haha, I'm not going to use those potatoes anymore. Fortunately, I was just down to pretty much the starters that I was going to use this year, so that's another area of growth for myself to make sure I do it right so I can use last year's potatoes as starters for this year. It's okay. We learn, we grow, we move on. I grew peppers and tomatoes in the same bed this year. I'm not the kind of person who goes crazy over tomatoes because I do some canning for salsa, but I don't can my tomatoes yet. I grew 20,550 grams or 45.21 pounds of tomatoes. That $4.13 average per pound, that's $186.72 worth of tomatoes. Peppers, 2,925 grams or 6.44 pounds at $3.63, being $23.68 worth of peppers. So that bed brought me in about $200 this year. I think I got the most value, personally, out of the green tomatoes at the very end because I made a massive batch of salsa verde, which was delectable and entirely from the garden, so immensely satisfying. And you just can't beat the flavor of something that you grow yourself and can yourself. In fact, I just took one of the Tupperware of frozen salsa out of my freezer for meals this week. I like to have it on eggs. That's what I'm planning to do this week ahead. Some eggs and potatoes, a little bit of salsa, kind of a Tex-Mex feel. Very satisfying. Again, salsa is the way that I stored this produce to use during the winter months. I think in years ahead, when I grow more tomatoes, I will try to can them whole to use for pasta or soups or whatever else you use whole tomatoes. Lots of good methods for that. And let's move on. So zucchinis are next, and usually, especially here, they are prolific. The joke is, when you go to church, you have to lock your doors because otherwise they'll come out and your car will be full of zucchinis, people giving them to you. I grew very paltry 1,575 grams or 3.47 pounds at $2.12 per pound, $7.35 worth of zucchinis, which was essentially just 3 or 4 medium-sized ones. I had some squash bugs blight my zucchinis. It was so disappointing. In years past, I think I had one plant that I had 18 giant zucchini from in 2018 or something like that. They are relatively easy to grow. I was just bad at getting ahead of the squash bug problem and killing those eggs and keeping them from destroying my plants. So we move on. It killed my springtime one, but as you saw, I did plant again late summer and I had a fall harvest of zucchini, several plants from that in a different raised bed. So in the end, I was the one that triumphed, not those darn bugs. And I stored these again by putting them through the food processor and freezing them. We've got a nice chest freezer down in the basement, which is where we put all of the stuff. I make a great zucchini bread. My wife's got a delicious zucchini muffin recipe, and that's where we primarily use it. We also have is it a minestrone recipe? A couple different soups. We eat a lot of soups that call for zucchini, so plenty of uses for it. Have you ever grown spaghetti squash? I didn't even know what it was until maybe 3 years ago when my mother started eating it. And then I looked into it, and it turns out it's fantastic, and we love it, so I grow a ton of it. This year I grew 31,375 grams worth, which is 69.03 pounds. At $1.28 per pound, I grew $88.35 worth of spaghetti squash. Wow! This stuff is so easy to save. All you have to do is cook it, scoop it out of the shell, and put it in some Tupperwares and put it in the freezer. That's it. And you just pull it out and defrost it anytime. It keeps for a whole year until you take the next harvest, in my experience. Great to share. It tastes equally good fresh as it does defrosted. Well, everything is better fresh, but you know what I mean. And it turns out there's way more uses for spaghetti squash than just having it as like a pasta substitute, having some meatballs and spaghetti sauce on top of the spaghetti squash. It makes really good bakes. I don't know where I'm going with this. I have a couple different recipes that I've tried and I like them. So if you've never done spaghetti squash, I highly recommend it. Easy to grow, easy to keep. They do spread like wildfire, but they are delicious. You maybe have a dozen heads of cauliflower this year. 2,900 grams, 6.38 pounds at $2.61 per pound, $16.65 worth of cauliflower. These were significantly larger heads than what you would get in stores, and you can see mine are a little bit more yellow and maybe more leggy than what you buy. I still haven't mastered wrapping them to blanch them as one does to get that crystalline white cauliflower that you see in the grocery store, but that's fine. It has a delicious flavor to it. We have a recipe that I think I take a cheese grater and I grate the cauliflower into tiny little, kind of looks like rice then, and I make a really good cauliflower salad with that, some chives, some craisins, some tahini sauce, some fresh parsley, lemon juice. You cook it for 4 minutes, the cauliflower, just in a microwave, and then you add the stuff and mix it together. It is a fantastic side for really any kind of summer dish. We eat our cauliflower fresh, never really have to preserve it for any reason, and that's that. The assorted squash and gourd section is kind of messy. Let's just go through the numbers. 8,400 grams worth of squash, which is 18.48 pounds at $2.45 average. That number has a big asterisk next to it. $45.28 worth of squash and gourds, about 13,500 pounds at 29.7 pounds. $3.16 per pound, being $93.85 worth of gourds. In the gourd category are also the pumpkins that I grew, some sizable pumpkins, those add a lot of weight. Again, squashes and gourds, pretty easy to store. Again, I tend to cube them and freeze them, take them out, put them in soups over the winter time. They do quite nicely. I also like to grow ornamental gourds, things that are maybe the size of your fist, a little bit bigger, to put out in a harvesty decoration in October, November time. Nobody says you have to grow things just for eating in your vegetable garden. You can have ornamentals, and they can be great, the flowers for the pollinators, and satisfying to look at after everything else is out of the garden. Yeah. I've got to be a little bit better at spacing those out. Fortunately, the trellis does help a lot with the vining and the branching, but still they end up taking over a lot of the footpath. Just a side note as I'm getting ready to plant the garden this year. Figured I'd talk about it with you since you're a captive audience. And hey, the final bit of footage here is for the green beans. I grew 3,450 grams, which is 7.59 pounds at $1.89 per pound, being $14.34 of fresh, ideal pole variety green beans. They are good. My favorite thing to do with them in the summer months when they're harvesting is to put them into this French salad, which is green beans and some sliced cherry tomatoes and mustard and a couple other things. It is such a good, fresh, crisp cold salad. Oh, I love it. But of course you can, steam them up and put them in anything else you want. I don't store my green beans, we eat them fresh. They are one of those delicious things that you look forward to during the harvest. And the variety that I grow, once they start flowering and you pick them, they'll continue to flower until past the first frost of the year. So we've got a nice long window for harvesting them. And where we have them, right at the entrance into the garden, you open up the garden gate and they are just dangling right above you as you walk in. So it's a magical feeling in the midst of high summer, early fall. So the footage that you've seen up to this point are the only bits of produce that I included in my calculation, that $818 value. I grew a lot more that I didn't include in that calculation, such as I used my radish leaves for making pesto. I grew mint, chives, and shallots, which were just so tiny that it didn't feel like pricing out essentially, but any kind of herbs you grow, they're ridiculously expensive in the grocery store. I have strawberries, asparagus, a currant bush, apple trees, pear trees, peach trees, and blackberries that are all perennials, and they're just a little bit too young to get a proper harvest out of. So come this year or next year for sure, we'll be getting a ton of produce out of that with a little bit of effort and time that went into getting those juvenile plants mature and producing. So this value is only going to increase. I can easily see in the next 3 or 4 years getting $2,000 or more worth of produce out of the garden. I also grew corn. For 2 years I've been learning how to grow it and I haven't had much success. First year I cross-pollinated it and the heads were disgusting. Last year it was like a horror scene. I went out there and squirrels had just knocked everything down. But I do use the corn husks as a decoration again for the harvest time in October, and they look quite lovely. So it saved me some money as opposed to going to a farm or some kind of market to buy those dried husks. And sunflowers. I grew several mammoth variety sunflowers that were 9 or 10 feet tall. Gorgeous to look at, the pollinators love them, and we saved the sunflower seeds, so they were a tasty snack as well. And something fun, that's for sure. I like verticality and creative placemaking in the garden, and sunflowers definitely help with that. And that is how I grew about $1,000 worth of produce this last year. That $818 value is just for what we get in our grocery store, which is not organic. If you had to buy the organic section, fresh produce, I think this value would be well above $1,000, and rightly so. You have to think this is just the actual cost of the produce. The value is much higher. I value knowing how my food is grown and taking satisfaction in growing myself and eating it immediately fresh from the garden, as opposed to things that had a transportation cost associated to it and whatever else, all the people handling the food at the grocery store. Nothing wrong with it, but I just like to grow stuff myself. So there's a higher value, a higher intrinsic value in growing it myself, which really bumps it past that $1,000 mark. So, do you track how much produce you grow? And if so, how much money do you think you're saving? What is the value to you for all this work that you're putting out there? I would love it if you commented below with some facts and figures to maybe compare. The size of my garden is about 1,300 square feet and growing with a small orchard on the outside. And it's so much fun every single year. So thank you for watching. Be sure to let me know those facts down below. And YouTube will recommend another video for you over here. Feel free to check it out. Subscribe if you haven't. And until next time, bye.